Hello everyone and welcome to the best of Season 4. This season has been full of new sub-series which now include fan-requested episodes. From Mortal Kombat to Howl's Moving Castle, this week's episode focuses on the hit animated film Across the Spiderverse. Without any further ado, hope you enjoy. Welcome to Satsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to this very special fan-requested episode of Satsunami. My name's Satsunami and joining me today is none other than the web-slinging anomaly himself, Andrew. Andrew, welcome back.
Bring me podcasts of Spider-Man.
Not gonna lie, I did get a fright when you slammed your fist there. Yeah, how are you doing tonight?
I'm good, thank you. Winter is slowly coming to an end over in Canada, and I'm excited to talk about today's topic.
The winter cannot end soon enough. As we're recording, I'm listening out and hoping that the rain kind of simmers down. So in order to brighten up your days, lovely listeners, today we are indeed going to be talking about a subject that is a wee bit brighter because Oscar season is right round the corner. And of course, Andrew, you had approached me saying, yeah, we should probably do an episode on it. We are going to be looking at one of the animated nominees, and that is indeed Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse, which was voted by the lovely Pandalorian listeners who are awesome and definitely follow us on X/Twitter at ChatSunamiPod. Wink, wink. If you haven't checked us out there before, then please do. But yeah, I am quite excited because as of recording this episode, I have just seen this film. Out of curiosity, what is your experience, Andrew? And I'm going to turn it on you because I'm just terrible like that. But what is your experience with this particular set of films? Because Into the Spider-Verse came out in 2018. It was critically acclaimed. Yeah, what's your history with this?
It's an interesting one because I did see Into the Spider-Verse at the cinema. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I thought it was very unique, very interesting. Wasn't blown away by it at the time. I think there was a lot of hype around it, a lot of interest in it. It really wasn't my kind of thing. I didn't quite vibe with the animation. I didn't really get into like the music scene because it wasn't really kind of my interest in music. And like I didn't really know at all about Miles Morales as a character. So it was all very new to me. I didn't really jump into it initially. I did enjoy it though. I did enjoy it, but not as much I think many others did. On subsequent viewings, I got more invested in it. I got more interested in it and I learned more about the background of it, the symbolism in it. And I got really, really invested, intrigued by that movie. So when the newest one, Across the Spider-Verse, came out in 2013 last year, I was very excited to go see it. I'd heard lots of exciting things about the film. And so I went to go see it at the cinema by myself because my partner was not interested in it at the time. And so I went by myself, which I've not done very often with movies, but I wanted to go and see this one and thought, wow, this is incredible. I'll get more into it later into the episode. But I was really kind of blown away by it. And so I insisted that my partner and her sister, who is a huge Spider-Man fan, come and see it with me again. They both for the first time, me for the second. And yeah, so I've seen it twice at the cinema now. I've not seen it since, but I've got very invested in it. I'm very excited for the third one, which I don't actually know if that's have a confirmed date yet, but I'm very excited for the third film coming out. So yeah, that's kind of my history with it. What about yourself?
Well, I was talking to you about this before we came on, but my first exposure to this film was actually someone in my work. This was pre-COVID days, right enough. I was sitting in the office and there was a guy who was working behind me. He was a massive nerd. Lovely guy, but still a massive nerd, and that's coming from me. And I remember he started talking to his team about this amazing film that he'd seen and how amazing Into the Spider-Verse was and everything. And, I heard him, I thought, all right, that's cool. And then I went about my day and never really gave it much thought. But then, of course, the reviews started coming in. People were saying, oh, it's amazing and everything. And again, I was really slow to the uptake. I was like, yeah, I don't know. I'll watch it when it comes out in streaming services. And of course, it came out on, I want to say Netflix or one of these ones. And I thought, you know what? I've got nothing better to do that day. I'll check it out. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I thought, wow, this is actually surprisingly a lot better than I thought it was going to be. I didn't think, again, it was amazing or mind-blowing, but I thought it was quite interesting interesting the way they took the story, the way they took the art direction as well, because that is, of course, something that we will be touching on, but that was one of the most striking things about this film. Just purely the fact that it was a film that was really artistically different. But again, when the sequel came out, I saw all the trailers for it, I saw people raving about it, but as I said, I didn't really watch it until literally the day of recording, because I thought, you know what, I'll cave in, I'll go get a copy, and I watched it. There's a lot to love about this film, but I can understand why a lot of people have been saying that the cinema experience would have been a whole lot better. But there is one controversial thing that I think a lot of people draw to this film, which I know we'll definitely get on to later, but it's more to do with the ending of this film. Do you know what I'm getting at here?
Yes, I think I understand what you mean, and I can appreciate that. But I think that, I mean, you can make that argument about lots of movies that we do love. So I think it is a harsh one to make. I think people's anger over that is, maybe I'm getting into something we can discuss in more detail later, but potentially their anger over that is more to do with the fact that they enjoyed the movie and they wanted a conclusion to it, and they felt like, oh, I wanted to see a payoff and ending that they didn't get. I assume that's what you were referring to.
Oh yeah, 100%. The part 1, part 2 phenomenon, as it were. I don't really know why this has become a big thing, and again, we will get into it soon, but I don't know why it's become a thing, because, you know, you've got your Dune part 1, part 2, you had your Mission Impossible part 1, part 2 before they dropped the part 2, part 1 thing. You had the Fast and Furious doing the part 1, part 2, so it's definitely a trend of the time, as it were. But see, without any further ado, will we just web zip into this film and see what all the fuss is about?
Yeah, I think we'll swing in and can't think of a good pun for that. Spider-Man.
Whipping my way downtown. We will be right back from this podcast multiverse, as it were, right after these messages. Welcome to Satsunami, a variety podcast that discusses topics from gaming and films to anime and general interests.
Previously on Chatsunami, we've analysed what makes a good horror game, conducted a retrospective on Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond, and listened to us take deep dives into both the Sonic and Halo franchises.
Also, if you're an anime fan, then don't forget to check us out on our sub-series, Chatsunani, where we dive into the world of anime. So far, we've reviewed things like Death Note, Princess Mononoke, and the hit Beyblade series.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can check us out on Spotify, iTunes, and all good podcast apps.
As always, stay safe,
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
First impressions can take only 6 seconds to make, but if you're neurodivergent, those quick judgments about you can be misleading.
Because of most people's ignorance around learning disabilities, people think it means you're intellectually incapable.
I'm not Rain Man. Every autistic person isn't Rain Man.
I thought I was talking to people who understood dyslexia and ADHD, but they did not.
They freaked out and were like, well, if you've got Tourette's, if it's going to be a problem, then we can just fire you and get someone else.
I'm Carolyn Keel, and I host Beyond 6 Seconds, a podcast where neurodivergent people share their lives and advocacy.
One of my goals is making autism not something that's scary.
I really want to help people understand dyspraxia a little bit better.
Get the real life of Tourette syndrome out there. Stop thinking we were nothing but a joke.
Let's shatter misconceptions and celebrate neurodiversity together. Listen at beyond6seconds.net or wherever you get your podcasts.
You have a choice between saving one person and saving every world.
I can do both!
You can't run forever, kid!
Thank you for listening to this episode of Chatsunami. If you want to listen to the second part of this episode, you get... No, I'm only kidding. We're not going to two-part you on this.
Chatsunami was the red panda all along.
It was just me seeing my evil twin, which was just like a raccoon from another dimension. Yeah, close enough. But jokes aside, we indeed have a relatively good knowledge on Spider-Man, don't we? Because a couple of months ago, you and I did the Spider-Man month where we talked about a number of topics. I say a couple of months ago, but I feel as if it's longer.
I was about to say, a couple of months ago, it was January 2023.
Jesus Christ. It's a year ago. No. Oh, time is a flat circle and all that, yeah. But yeah, suffice to say, I wouldn't say we're like diehard Spider-Man nerds. We know everything about it, but we're relatively knowledgeable.
I got like 8 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 in the Spider-Man trivia, so I think I'm probably an expert.
Oh, that is true. That is true. So any hard-hitting questions, please feel free to contact Andrew at allyourquestions@chatsunami.com. Yeah, suffice to say, we know what we're talking about, don't we? Relatively so. I mean, that's pretty much a podcast tagline, isn't it? Chatsunami, we kind of know what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I've had an interest in Spider-Man for a very long time. I know quite a bit about it. As I said, I wasn't really familiar with Miles Morales. I'm sure he has appeared in stuff that I watched, but it must have been a very long time ago that I saw it. I didn't ever play the PlayStation games because I didn't have a PlayStation. I know that the more modern PlayStation Spider-Man games have Miles Morales as quite a key kind of character. I don't know if that was after the first Spider-Verse movie, though, or not, but I wasn't really familiar with the character, so despite my claim as being Spider-Man aficionado, I don't really know that much about the character, so it has been very interesting to see it represented in a very new, well, I say not a new way for me, in a completely fresh Spider-Man view for me.
I mean, you're completely right, though. My exposure to the Spider-Man franchise is always through the lens of Peter Parker. You have Peter Parker, you have J. Jonah Jameson, which I have to admit, I did like the joke that in every single Spider-Man universe there was a J. Jonah Jameson character that just spoke exactly the same. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, J.K. Simmons crosses all universes.
Yeah, which I thought was just, such a brilliant touch in this film. But yeah, usually it's between him and either Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy, because I grew up with the Sam Raimi films, as we talked about in our Raimi Trilogy retrospective episode on Spider-Man month. Again, fantastic month. Please go check it out after this episode. But yeah, that was my first entry into the series, and then I watched the Amazing Spider-Man films, but again it was focused on Peter Parker. Then of course Tom Holland came around, and again Peter Parker, which, you know, Peter Parker is the quintessential character for Spider-Man whenever you think of it. But at the same time, when Into the Spider-Verse came out, they introduced Miles Morales, which I have to say and admit as well, I didn't know as much. I knew he was an alternate version of Spider-Man, because you had Miles Morales, Miguel O'Hara, I think Ben Parker's his name, whoever the Scarlet Spider is, the clone crybaby one in this film. But yeah, I'd seen him kicking around because you had all the alternative skins in other games as well. And I can't remember, because it's something you mentioned there when you talked about the PlayStation 4 game, because what's interesting about that is they brought in Spider-Man and they brought in Peter Parker, and they do introduce Miles Morales as a side character. And again, spoilers, please feel free to skip a couple of seconds ahead, but Miles does get bit and they released his own spin-off game, as it were. It felt more like an expansion, and I have to admit I haven't played much of that, but it was interesting to see them take Miles Morales and give him more of a focal point. But then of course, as you said, the Into the Spider-Verse film came out, and the profile for character just shot right up. Everyone was more interested in him. They were more interested in other characters like Spider-Gwen, Spider-Man Noir as well in the old film.
Peter Parker,
yeah. Penny Parker is the other one, I think the anime one. And then this film you've got Spider-Man 2099, as well as a whole plethora of other Spider people. So here's a question for you, because I know you of course grew up with the Raimi films as well, the Andrew Garfield ones and such. Do you think they've done a good job in raising a profile about the Miles Morales character?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've been informed as to who Miles is. You've had that kind of struggle as to him adapting to being a Spider-Man that isn't your standard Spider-Man. I think as well is a huge racial element to that. Seemingly he's the only black Spider-Man that we see, at least. And so I think that there's certainly an element of him coming into his own and taking on the mantle as Spider-Man Spider-Man, which I know there's a lot of controversy from certain groups on that and on the referral to him as Spider-Man. But I do think I've learned who Miles is. I've learned his power set. I've learned his backstory, kind of getting his origin through all of this and where he kind of stands, like his canon events, what they'll be. I think we'll learn more about that in the third one. But yeah, I think that both Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse has told Miles' story very well. I think it's informed us about who the character is. Again, I've not seen, apart from these two movies, Miles in anything else. So I don't know if he's kind of universally represented in this way or whether this is a more unique telling of his story.
Because I have to say, what I find quite interesting about it is, and I know this is like a major theme in Into the Spider-Verse, and especially in Across the Spider-Verse, where he is trying to come into his own as Spider-Man, and what I was kind of laughing at in my head was the fact that he has a happier home life compared to Peter Parker, whose parents are gone, Uncle Ben's been shot, and he's got, you know, obviously except for what happens in the first film with his uncle, but, you know, he's still got his parents there and everything. But what's even more interesting is the fact that they do develop his character as his own Spider-Man. The fact that although he's got the name Spider-Man, at the same time, you know it's Miles Morales' Spider-Man. He puts his identity on the character, and I think that is in part as well to the voice actor, who does an absolutely brilliant job in conveying that emotion, conveying his happiness, sadness, stress in the situations he's thrust into. Honestly, no, I think they do a good job, because the reason I'm bringing so much attention to Miles just now is the fact that I feel as if he wasn't a strong character, then this would, no pun intended, unravel like a web. Because if he wasn't a relatively likeable character, then would you feel as invested in this if he was whiny and not as endearing?
No, for sure. I mean, I think that goes without saying that he kind of has to be interesting. And I mean, that's one of the criticisms of a lot of other Spider-Man adaptations. A lot of people don't like Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man because they find him to be quite whiny. A lot of people don't like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man because they don't feel like he feels realistic to the character. A lot of people don't like Tom Holland's Spider-Man because they don't feel like he does things himself. They think he's at the whim of technology and what he's given by the likes of Iron Man. I don't necessarily agree with any or all of those points, but those are kind of things that are leveled against other adaptations of Spider-Man. And so it is interesting that this is probably the most likable Spider-Man of the three. I think it's the least controversial thing to say that he is a likable character. A lot of people might not like his title as Spider-Man, but he's a likable character, and I don't really hear anything against that. I don't know if you think differently, if you've heard anything different to that, but I think that he kind of represents himself quite well. You do feel an emotional attachment to what is happening in his life.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't think I've heard too much in terms of people who have said, oh, we don't like him because, you know, he's whiny or he's an annoying character. Purely on a character analysis, I've really not heard many people criticise him. I think that's quite indicative of the whole series, because I don't think there's too many characters that you could look at in this film and say, oh god, they're annoying, or roll your eyes at. Maybe one or two background characters, but even then, that's like a real stretch. To have a multiverse story that stands out, and here's where I get into slightly controversial territory here with the Marvel fans. The multiverse seems to be the latest trend that they're going through right now. You had it with Spider-Man Far From Home, you of course had it in the first Into the Spider-Verse, Doctor Strange, Ant-Man Quantumania. So it's something that I think a lot of fans were starting to get a little bit tired of, the whole multiverse thing. And especially when you have to get all these characters together, you have to make sure that they're somewhat endearing. You know, you can't just have a bunch of references mushed together and be like, oh look, it's 1960s Spider-Man, or oh look, it's Japanese Spider-Man. It has to be somewhat coherent, and granted there are some moments where it gets a little bit overwhelming in that regard, but for the core cast of characters, which is something interesting actually, because this film doesn't start out with Miles Morales. It starts out with Gwen Stacy, or rather Spider-Gwen, narrating her origin story and things. And I'm going to be honest, I really like Gwen's character. I think she is a really good addition to the film. But it is quite interesting they start off from her point of view. Like, I'm just wondering what you thought of that when you first went into this.
I was really surprised that they did that, and I was pleasantly surprised. It worked so well that you got that bit more background to Gwen. The title is Spider-Man Across the Spiderverse. It isn't Miles Morales Across the Spiderverse. It covers Spider-Man, Spider-Woman across each edition, so you're seeing different perspectives. You've already been introduced to Gwen in the previous film. She is one of the only recurring people from the previous one that kind of came across from the multiverse, because you don't have Spider-Pig, Penny Parker, or Spider-Man Noir until the very, very end of the movie. But you do get Gwen, you get Miles, and you get Peter B. Parker, who's now a dad. And so getting Gwen's perspective is really interesting. And kind of just touching on what you said earlier about the multiverse thing being the hot thing in Hollywood and superhero movies especially. I don't know that that was necessarily the case pre Into the Spider-Verse. I don't think there had been many, if any, multiverse superhero movies until that point. You can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Definitely not Googling it.
I'll say that I think Across the Spider-Verse does this even better than Into the Spider-Verse. What is interesting is that the representation of multiverse in these movies, because it's animated, they represent that as different animation styles. And so whereas in Spider-Man No Way Home, you had 3 Spider-Men from different universes come together, and like there were certainly differences to them. Some of them had different costumes, all that kind of stuff, but they were fundamentally just 3 dudes. Whereas in Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse, you're seeing different animation styles, like on screen together, clashing with each other and vibing with each other. Some are more interesting than others, but you have characters we'll talk about later, but like Hobie, who's Spider-Punk, and like his constantly changing animation style. And you have Penny Parker and Into the Spider-Verse, like an anime version. You have Spider-Man Noir, as the name implies, a black and white noir, very old school looking animation. Base animation from Miles' universe is just sort of very vibrant with colors. So you're getting this beautiful kind of collaboration of different universes together, which is so interesting, especially when you compare it to what, for example, the MCU or the DCEU have done with multiverse and how uninteresting it has tended to be.
Just thinking back to, for example, the Multiverse of Madness, because I quickly looked up when the multiverse was first introduced, and don't get me wrong, I think Days of Future Past for the X-Men film, and again, it's not linked to this, but they technically did a kind of multiverse thing, very briefly, mind you, but that wasn't really the trend of the time. So it's like, it's not the first series to tackle this kind of thing. But according to the wonderful Google, who please sponsor us, they were saying that the first introduction of a multiverse theory was Doctor Strange 2016, and it wasn't really until 2021 that they started their multiverse arc with No Way Home, Quantumania, that kind of thing. So yeah, you're right that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse predates these tropes, but touching on something you said there, because you said how it looks so uninteresting, the one that comes to mind is the Multiverse of Madness, where although it's a cool idea, you get different characters from different dimensions like Captain Carter and Charles Xavier. At the end of the day, it's still people in the same room with different costumes. It wasn't anything too visually interesting. I think there's maybe one point in that film that I watched, I thought, oh, this is cool when they're jumping through dimensions and things are changing, but see, other than that...
I was about to bring up exactly that there's a point where they kind of stop repeatedly falling through universes, and you're like, oh, I wish they would just stop at this universe for a bit and just have a bit more time there. But because obviously that's going to be very expensive to do, they don't do that. They just go, oh, and we're in a universe that's kind of like ours, but a bit funky. They have pizza balls.
It reminds me of, you know, that episode in The Simpsons, The Treehouse of Horror, where Homer travels in time with the toaster and he goes to the different futures because he stepped on a bug or something. But that's what it feels like. You're exactly right, because by the end of that episode, spoilers again, but Homer goes to a world that is nearly identical to his, but they have lizard tongues or something like that, and Homer shrugs and he goes, close enough. And you know, it's like nothing's different except that one minor thing. That's how a lot of these other films feel, like there's very minimal differences with what they're trying to portray. Whereas this film, and before we go on to the other characters, should we talk about the animation? Because what you were saying there about the different clashes of animation for the different characters, I mean, you have a Lego universe, which I thought was hilarious. I joked before, but you've even got the 1960s Spider-Man swinging in to try and save the day, and I thought that was hilarious because it's when Miles is trying to escape and he's like, don't worry, I'll stop him. And he's like, oh, my back, and he just flies right in front of him, which I thought, okay, that's pretty funny. And of course, as you said, for Spider-Punk, there's more of a kind of newspaper-esque art style.
What's interesting about Spider-Punk is that there's no consistency in his art style, and so it's supposed to be kind of like a representation of the character himself, never showing any consistency, that you can't really peg him down as to being one thing. The art style is constantly changing and slightly altering and all that kind of thing, and his guitar is like framed at different frames per second than the rest of his body. Lots of different little aspects to him that's really interesting in terms of how they animated him.
But no, I genuinely thought that the animation in this was absolutely gorgeous at times. I feel as if it probably would have been better if you were watching this in like a bigger screen in the cinema, but visually it is very striking. I absolutely loved, see the very beginning where it was Spider-Gwen versus the Vulture, but it was like a vulture from a Da Vinci sketch. I thought that was incredible. The first time I saw that, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And as you said, the colours are just, they're vibrant, they are so distinctive. The only drawback I would have with it is maybe that in some points I feel as if they go a little bit too over the top with some action scenes where it's like the very intense colours flashing and things like that. Sometimes I felt as if maybe they went a wee bit too far. To quote George Lucas, maybe they went a wee bit too far in a few places, but I wouldn't say overall that detracts from how beautiful this film looks. But I know you have so many thoughts about this.
Yeah, the animation, I wouldn't say it carries the movie because I think there's so many good things about the movie, but I think that it sets this film apart from so many others just due to how unique the animation is. And it is produced by Sony Animations, Sony Picture Animation, who have the most bizarre filmography because they'll produce things like Into the Spider-Verse, Across the Spider-Verse, Mitchell's vs. the Machines, which is very fun. They produced Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. But then at the same time, they've also made absolutely batshit movies like Surf's Up and The Angry Birds and The Emoji Movie.
All classics of cinema.
Yeah, it's a pretty weird studio in terms of what they create. There's some absolute gorgeous masterpieces there. And like, I want to kind of mention again Mitchell's vs. the Machines, because that is a brilliant movie. If you've not seen that, I really recommend it. And there's a lot of similarities in terms of where the animation group that worked on Spider-Verse also worked on Mitchell's vs. the Machines, and Lord and Miller, who wrote Spider-Verse, I'm pretty sure also wrote Mitchell's vs. the Machines. Have you seen that movie?
No, but it is on the watch list. That'll be next week's episode.
You should definitely check it out. It came out a couple of years ago. I watched it in the early mid-COVID era. Brought a tear to my eye. It was really beautiful. I really liked it. So I highly recommend that. And there's been some absolutely brilliant people that worked on Spider-Verse. You have, as I mentioned, Lord and Miller, Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, as well as Dave Callahan, who wrote the film. The director is Joaquim Dos Santos. I don't know if you're familiar with that name, Satsu, but Joaquim Dos Santos was the director for much of Avatar: The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra.
Oh, okay.
He's already kind of was known to me and elevated my interest in these films when I knew that he was going to be helming them. But just kind of getting back to the animation, it is just so interesting that it was able to sort of fuse these different styles together. There are some that I don't think work quite as well. I thought that the anime Penny Parker was kind of lazy in terms of just stereotype anime kind of look. I don't know necessarily how you would have done it in a way that didn't look kind of awkward. So I think they did maybe as best they could with that, but I don't think that that necessarily works as well. There are others I don't like as much. I do love what they do in this movie with the watercolor animation that they do a lot for Gwen. It almost like starts pouring down the page in color, or down the screen rather. I think that is so interesting. That is what really hooked me. I think my heart like skipped a beat almost sort of watching that because I was completely in awe of that animation. I love watercolor paintings anyway, so using watercolor in animation, I just was absolutely in love with it. I thought that was so cool. I love what the animation told with regards to the story and how the use of color was used to tell the story, like in Gwen's kind of moments of real depression and sadness, how they utilized those colors. And I mean, some people have speculated that the colors are telling more than what is actually being necessarily suggested. That is there any kind of suggestion of Gwen being trans because of the use of those colors. Very interesting to know if that was intentional, if the character is in fact trans, which would possibly be the first trans superhero to my knowledge. But I think that is just absolutely brilliant in terms of how they tell the story and emote with the different art styles, the different animation. What was kind of your take on that?
What I found quite interesting, and normally I would criticise this in any other film, where a lot of the things that they say through the animation is, I wouldn't say relatively obvious, because I don't want to sound pretentious to be like, oh, I knew what they're trying to say, but in especially Gwen's story, you see she comes home and she is literally blue, a colour that symbolises feelings of sorrow, depression, uncertainty, that kind of thing. And then what I found really lovely was when the dad comes in the room and they're talking and she gives him a big hug, that her colour returns to normal, that she is brightened up by this moment of respite and things. And it's moments like that that do pop out quite a lot, but I feel as if it works so well with how they're telling the story, because you see a lot of colour shifts and things. And I was joking to you because another show that this actually reminded me of was JoJo's Bizarre Adventures, which, well, there aren't as many muscular guys summoning spirits and things to fight in this one. At the same time, they do a very similar thing in their art style where they change the colours depending on the mood. So you've got the neutral colour palette, but then the characters change colour, like their hair changes colour mainly based on what's going on in the situation. So I thought that was really cool. And I have to agree with you when you were touching on the use of blue and pink as trans symbolism, as it were, because I remember the discourse that was going around when the film came out, and that was one of the things that was like first and foremost there when it was getting talked about. So that was quite interesting to see that being brought into the frame. But overall, I thought that the way they used the animation to tell the story was done absolutely amazing, because what it felt like was, again, this might be very surface level analysis here, but what it felt like was a bunch of comic books being smushed together. And that's what I loved about the animation, because as we were talking about earlier, each character has a very distinctive art style. They come from their own universes. So as I said, Spider-Man 2099, he's got the more futuristic one. Miles Morales is relatively standard, but you had the, I don't even know what you call them, you know, when the onomatopoeia comes out the page, like the thwip and the pow, and the Batman 60 show where it's like boof. When they popped up, it definitely felt like a comic book coming to life, and the way that they just drew the attention in was really interesting. One particular character that I want to bring attention to in the context of the animation is the villain Spot. So Spot is an interesting character because he is almost like the Mysterio of this film initially, a character who is treated initially as a joke and then he becomes a multiversal threat. I just love how he began as like a throwaway character in the first film. They've probably looked back in that film and gone, oh yeah, that would be funny if he was the main villain. And I thought that was really well done. But he starts off as this relatively pitiful and pathetic wannabe criminal, and then he accidentally realises that he can travel the multiverse, and to borrow a phrase from Star Wars, he gets unlimited power, and he goes from being basically this blob of a person. It looks more like Pepsi Man with spots at the beginning, Pepsi Man with chickenpox as it were, to what is essentially an eldritch horror where his lines are all scratchy and they're not consistent, they're like struggling to hold together. I thought the design at the end, like the inverse, was so good. I was looking at him thinking, this is such a cool design, even though it is literally just a humanoid shape. It's very basic. Given what you know about the character, they managed to represent his inner turmoil, his uncertainty, as it were, as to where he belongs in the world. Because, you know, after the accident, he does say that Miles Morales basically took everything away from him, whether it was intentional or not, but he took everything away from him. His life, his entire career. So to turn him into something that is just unrecognisable at the end, I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. And again, it's quite interesting to see that they managed to perfectly balance the comic relief villain versus what he ends up becoming by the end of it.
That was very impressive. It was very interesting because he started out as being a dude in a Dalmatian, more morph suit, like some sort of Dalmatian Slender Man, into, as you said, being a very intimidating seeming villain. I was concerned for everyone by the end, whereas I was not at the beginning. And they present that in such an interesting way, where you are introduced to him very early on. It's seeming like a just villain of the moment. He's trying to rob a store. Miles stops him. He foils himself because he falls into his own spot in a very comic relief kind of way. And you think like, oh, well, that's that. I wonder who the actual villain will be. And in many ways, one of the most consistent villain throughout is another Spider-Man. It's Miguel O'Hara. And you kind of feel like he's acting like more of a villain in the movie, but you just have that overarching threat of Spot getting more and more powerful. And as you find out later, targeting Miles to ruin his life in the same way that he felt that his life had been ruined. So the character of Spot is done in such an interesting way. And I can't think of many other examples where the comic relief villain has been able to be almost leveled up to being someone that is genuinely in-universe frightening, but to the audience just more intimidating and someone to take seriously. And often when they try that, it often just kind of seems a bit dorky, but I think that they did balance that very well in this movie. I would agree. I think that the way they handle Spot is really interesting in terms of how they present him as a villain, as his power set. He's kind of existed within the Marvel comic universe for quite a while, kind of off and on as a Spider-Man villain, sometimes as a Daredevil villain. He kind of reminds me of like Mirror Master from the DC universe as being quite a dorky kind of villain that they've managed to make interesting.
Because I have to say, it almost reminds me of, and I'm being very flippant here by calling it the Arkham treatment, but you know how in the Batman Arkham games where they had obviously all the iconic villains that Batman fought, but then they also had the sillier ones, but they still made them quite intimidating.
Not Condiment King.
In that they had relatively minor villains like the Mad Hatter, which, as the name implies, it's the Alice in Wonderland themed one, which you would think, well, that's a pretty silly villain, and then you see what he actually does when he's unleashed, and it's utterly horrifying. And there's a whole bunch there as well. Obviously not the Condiment King as far as I know, but there will be a Batman fan who will come and say, oh no, he was in it.
Kite Man.
Oh, he was in the Harley Quinn thing. Anyway, sorry, that's another show.
That's why I know him. Condiment King is also in Harley Quinn. I know Condiment King mostly from Lego Batman movie though.
But yeah, it was interesting to see how they took Spot from being a comic relief villain to basically a real threat. Again, going back to something you said at the beginning, we talked about Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where he goes to a adjacent Earth from ours. It's like, it's Earth, but it's not Earth. There were some moments where they go to the Spider headquarters, and I felt as if the chase when they were going through it was like, all right, okay, it's just a futuristic city, generic futuristic city, and I'm probably going to get crucified by the Spider-Man 2099 fans who are like, no, it's like New York. Yeah, some bits like that you're kind of like, I don't know, but no, overall, I felt as if for the most part, going back to the animation briefly, that they did manage to jump between universes relatively well. There were some places I wish they stayed more in than others. I would watch the hell out of a Lego Spider-Man film. See, when they actually popped up there, I'm not going to lie, I was actually flabbergasted when they did that, because I was like, oh, they're really going there. Another thing that they did as well, which I thought was interesting, was they introduced live action elements as well, because I'm pretty sure Andrew Garfield was in this film at one point when they were talking about how each Spider-Man had to have a canon event.
It shows both Tobey Maguire and it shows Andrew Garfield as like a clip, but you also see Donald Glover, who's in the MCU, and he's supposed to represent the Prowler, and so that was quite cool. It had a live action element to that. Just quickly going back to what you said about the Lego verse, do you know the story behind that in terms of who animated that?
No, who was it?
It was like a 12-year-old boy that directed that entire scene.
No way.
He does Lego stop motion movies on YouTube, and I don't know who from Sony Animation approached him, but they approached him to do that scene, and so that's all stop motion animation that this 12-year-old did.
Well, that would explain why they use the lines from the Raimi films, because that was something I don't know if you noticed this when you watched it, but when he's walking to the bathroom, you hear Jameson talking about, I don't know, bring me pictures of Spider-Man, but it's clearly J.K. Simmons that's talking, but it doesn't sound like it's new lines, because they use that later on when Miles is trying to escape and he goes by Dr. Octopus, and he also says that, because there's a lot of references to those films. Spot even saying the power of multiverse dimensions in the palm of my hand and things. But no, that is really cool. I actually didn't know that about the Lego scene. That is really, really cool.
Yeah, which kind of explains why we don't really get more there. It's asking a lot for a 12-year-old who has homework and other stuff to do to also produce this stop motion scene.
Yeah, he's also got a Spider-Man film to make. Come on, chop chop. Nah, that is really cool.
If I'm getting his age wrong, then I do apologise, but my memory is he was either 12 or 13.
And if it is indeed correct, definitely don't go spreading this episode at all, sharing it with your friends. Here's a question for you. Before we end on like a high note, I have to bring the mood down a wee bit here. I've got to ask you, as a bona fide co-host of Satsunami, was there anything that you didn't like about this film? Because I know we've been really praising this film quite a lot, and this might be heresy to certain members of the fan base.
If I have a criticism of it, I would say for something that's part one of a story, I think it goes on too long. I think that if they wanted to wrap it up into being a part one story, I would have rather it not have dragged on. I think part of the frustration that others have, I don't have this as much, but I can certainly understand where they're coming from, is that it kind of felt like you've been watching a lot and it was building up to something, and then it cut off and said like, actually the rest of this is in another movie. And so I can sympathize with the irritation that many have with the ending, largely because I think that the film went on for a long time and then didn't really have that payoff. And you can say that about so many movies. You could say that about Lord of the Rings. You could say that about Star Wars. Like the makers of the movie try to compare the movie to Empire Strikes Back, and like in terms of what they were trying to do with the ending. It's almost blasphemous to say that for many, but I can kind of understand what they mean by that. I know that so many films, books, other adaptations in media will do this, and they're telling their story. They told it very beautifully, and we've been talking for almost an hour, I guess, on why the film is so brilliant and beautiful. And part of that is because they were able to tell that story in that time frame that we've talked about, balancing each animation style and character and building up this villain and having a sympathize with Miles. Like that does take quite a while to do, but I can understand the irritation behind the ending because of it being quite a long movie and you don't feel like you got that payoff. For me, I wasn't as irritated by that because it did just kind of make me excited for the next one. One other thing that you'd probably criticize the movie for is just because of how beautiful it is and the time crunch associated with it, is that I have such a deep sympathy for the animators, because I know that they were put through quite a lot to get this movie ready and done, and even to almost the last moment, like just before it hit theaters, they were still working on certain aspects of it. I heard that some movie screenings were different from other movie screenings because they created like different versions of the movie.
Yeah.
That put the animators under even more stress, and the editors as well. And so I feel a great sympathy towards them. I have a great appreciation for everyone involved because of how brilliant this movie is. But there's both the trepidation of, I hope that this takes a long time to be made, because I don't want these animators, editors, other people within the industry to suffer to make this film for us, and that I want it to be done well, so I want them to take their time on it. But then you're also balancing that with the fact that I was left on a cliffhanger and I want a resolution. And that's kind of where I am with that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, if you have other negatives you want to kind of bring up.
Well, touching on the ending initially, let's get this big spider elephant out of the room first. As I said before, I didn't see this film when it came out, but I definitely heard about the cliffhanger ending and everything, and loads of people complaining that they didn't know it was going to be a part one, part two situation. Can't remember specifically, but a lot of people were saying it was almost like false advertising, that there were some people who genuinely just were really disappointed. One of my friends actually went to the cinema with someone to see this, and he didn't even realise it was a part one, part two situation. So by the time the film ended, it was like, what the hell? Why have I been sitting here for about 2 hours, 20 minutes and there's no resolution? And it's interesting what you brought up there, because you talked about the idea of what a lot of trilogies do. That, of course, being, I think it's like the 3-act structure for trilogies, and I can't remember who came up with this, so apologies to any of the media students and the audience here. But the idea behind it is the first film establishes the world and it tells the story of the hero's rise, and then in the second film in the trilogy you get the low point. This is exactly what Empire Strikes Back did, where that was a low low point of the series where the villains won, but there was still that sense of hope at the end that even though things had gone wrong, they still had something to fight for. And I think that's the key difference between The Empire Strikes Back or something similar versus this film, because I feel as if you watch The Empire Strikes Back on its own, it gives you a cliffhanger, but it's still a good enough film to watch on its own. I mean, obviously you have to get the full conclusion, but you wouldn't really have to go and rush to watch what happens next in The Return of the Jedi. But for this film, it almost feels like, see if you were watching The Two Towers for Lord of the Rings and they stopped the film right after the Berserker Uruk-hai blew up Helm's Deep. Like, see if they cut it there and then it was like continued in part 2. I feel as if that's why people got quite annoyed at this film, and I can understand why fans were frustrated at that. I mean, personally, going into it knowing that's what I was going to get, I wasn't as affected as other people may have been, but I could see why people might have felt disgruntled. And again, mirroring your point exactly, I totally agree that these animators, and it's not just in particular to this film studio, it's like a wider issue in a lot of creative industries where these companies want a product out by a certain point, they're introducing this crunch culture and they want results fast, they want the film fast. I completely forgot that they released different versions of the film just because of how bad the process was, but at the end of the day, I do think it's absolutely fantastic what they managed to turn out. I think that the animation is fantastic for the most part, but it's just a shame that it is a product of this crunch culture. The other thing as well, I would say, going off on that point about the ending, is I felt as if the ending seemed very abrupt. I have to admit, this is going to sound really weird, but I loved the animation and the credits. I thought that was absolutely brilliant and really well done, but the bit before it where Miles is trapped and everything in the alternate future, which I have to say, that was a plot twist I actually didn't see coming. When I was watching it, I was like, oh right, what's wrong about this? Why doesn't she recognise Spider-Man? And then it clicked when obviously they said about Spider-42 and transporting him into the wrong universe. I thought, oh, that is so clever the way they've done that. But at the end, see when Gwen basically rounds up all of the other characters and it's like, oh, I've got all your characters, new and old, that you love, and we're going to save Miles and such. And I get what they were going for, but you can definitely tell they just crammed that in at the end to set up for the sequel. So it almost doesn't feel as if the ending of this film is a conclusive end. It feels more like it's just sequel bait, as it were, that, oh, we're going to continue this, but you have to wait another couple of years, which, you know, we should be willing to wait for a film of this magnitude. But yeah, I just felt it was kind of rushed at the end, and especially, as you said, for a film that's over 2 hours long, there was absolutely no need to rush the ending as they had. I think they should have paced that out a bit better, but again, that could be for a whole myriad of reasons, whether that is because of the pressures of the studio or crunch culture. The only other minor nitpick, and again, this is something I was saying to you when I was watching the film, there was a lot of strange choices about some of the characters, especially about Spider-Woman, or rather, I think her name's Jessica Drew in the comics. And for anyone who doesn't remember, that was the one who, at the very beginning, she helps Spider-Man 2099 and Spider-Gwen defeat the Vulture. But she comes in riding a motorcycle pregnant, and I know it's a reference to like a Mother's Day comic or something for the same character, but yeah, I thought that was kind of weird. I know that's a nitpick, and I thought her character was good enough, but the fact she spent the whole film pregnant and flipping around just seemed strange. I don't want to be critical of saying that people who are pregnant can do things for themselves when they are.
Pregnant people can be superheroes too, Satsu. It's 2024.
Well, they can be, but all I'm saying is that baby will come out with vertigo and be like, oh my god. No, it was just a strange thing to add in. I mean, this is the film with a spider T-Rex, so it's not a huge leap. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, that ruined the film for me, because it didn't. Yeah, no, that's really the only other minor negative I would say. But again, that's me mainly nitpicking. I feel as if the major gripes I have with this film are towards the end, and its kind of abruptness and its desire to basically build up to something more. A bit like what the MCU films have started to do nowadays, where a Phase 4 film seems more like they're trying to build up to something new rather than tell their own locked-in, cohesive story.
There's a couple of things that I think that deserve mentioning that we didn't really speak much about. Like some of the other characters that were introduced. Praviter Pabhakar, who is like an Indian Spider-Man. He's a Spider-Man that lives in Mumbai, India, and so we kind of get to see this very interesting, futuristic, different version of a Mumbai, and the animation is very, very interesting and beautiful. A lot of the characters had some really kind of good quips, and I think that he in particular had a lot of very good quips, which I was quite happy about, because I think one of the most important aspects of a Spider-Man is that they are witty and bouncing off of people to make jokes really on the fly, and I think that Paviter's Spider-Man did that really, really well. So I think that was really an interesting take. I don't know, what did you think of the character and the kind of that universe that we got to see very briefly?
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting, but I have to say, I'm not sure whether that was... Again, this is going to put me in the ire of the Spider-Man fans here, but I didn't know if he was a existing character before the film, or if he was like introduced after, because I know, especially for Jessica Drew, they made some changes to her character, because I think they combined two Spider-Women together for her character, but it was quite interesting to see that they were introducing the wacky side of the franchise, but on the flip side, they were also embracing that wacky side. You know, they weren't trying to be overly serious, except for one character, which of course was Miguel O'Hara, but they even point that out and everything, which I did think was really interesting.
2004, sorry.
Oh, was he an actual character?
Yeah, he's existed since 2004, but first appearance was Spider-Man India #1. I don't know if he crossed over to anything else.
See, that's the brilliant thing about this film, because it introduces you to parts of the franchise that you never really knew about, or you probably wouldn't have been exposed to, because we're probably surface Spider-Man fans. I don't know if you've got like a shrine to Tobey Maguire in your room right now, but walking out of the studio with the black suit... For legal reasons, I'm not allowed to hum the theme song. We basically get our exposure through the Marvel films, through the Sony films for Spider-Man, and, you know, with the exception of maybe a couple of comics and shows that come out and manage to catch them, I wouldn't say we go in digging deep into the lore, unless, you know, it's prompted by like a silly shower thought or a question. But yeah, it is interesting to see that this film does draw attention to these characters, because I have seen these kind of things. See, when you play the Spider-Man games, whether it's Spider-Man for the PlayStation 4 when it came out, or whether it's the old Enter Electro, or I can't even remember what the first one was called for the PlayStation 1, but it had Carnage in it and Doc Ock. But you know, you got the different Spider-Man suits, like you got Punk Spider, you got the one with the Fantastic Four, but he had a paper bag over his head, but he was in this film as well. You had Spider-Cat, of course, you had the T-Rex, which I have to admit I've never heard of in my life. The one that made me chuckle though was with Peter Park's car, which I thought was hilarious. But there was just so many of them that obviously you can't give them all their own stories to tell in a film like this, especially for a 2-hour 20 film. So I felt for the most part they did focus on the right characters. They obviously focused on Miles, they focused on Gwen. They didn't really focus as much on Miguel. Like they did, but then when he disappears for a while and then he comes back. One thing I did find funny though was, because I obviously have just seen this film, I saw the memes before I saw this. So you know Miguel's intro music when he punches... Yeah, that's it. Yeah, see, when I heard that, all I thought was all those meme TikToks where it's like, I'm sorry, it's a canon event. And I'm like, oh, I know what a canon event is. So the memes helped.
When I was doing the research for this, there was a section section in the article all about just that TikTok and the influence the film had on TikTok with the canon event.
It was very popular when this film came out, for sure. Yeah, that kind of spoiled it for me a wee bit whenever he popped up and they had the and you're like, oh no.
The first time I saw it was in the movie, so every time I would hear it on TikTok, I was like, oh, it's the reference to the movie. So I didn't have that pre-existing kind of notion of it. So I went in and it was still kind of cool. But I think now if I rewatch it or if they reuse it again in the sequel, that'll certainly be in the back of my mind. I do still think that the film's positives far outweigh its negatives. And the kind of motivator for us doing this episode today was its nomination at the Academy Awards in 2024. And so we're debating which of the films we would discuss, and we put out a vote to discuss those films, and that's what Spider-Verse ultimately won that. So the nominees, on top of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, are Nimona, Elemental, The Boy and the Heron, and Robot Dreams. And just sort of before you give your impressions of and say what you've seen of those, I've seen all of those but Robot Dreams. How many of those have you seen, if any others?
Yeah, the only one I've really seen out that list is Elemental, which I have to admit I watched with my partner and we absolutely loved it. It's an absolutely beautiful film with a lot of great animation. Again, episode for another day, but I really enjoyed that. But that's the only one I've really seen. Nimona has been on my radar for quite a while. I have been targeting that. I still haven't seen it yet, but I know that as of today anyway, I think that Netflix have uploaded the full film for free on YouTube, which I have to admit was quite surprising, but at the same time, I think that is pretty cool that they managed to do that. I just wish they'd done that for Across the Spiderverse, but that's another story. Yeah, for the other ones, I'm not as savvy about them. It seems like a relatively solid list. From what I've read about these films, it does seem like a very good list. As for where Spider-Man lands in this list, yeah, I would say it's probably deserving. I can't think of really many other animations that have come out recently that deserve it. I almost feel as if The Boy and the Heron, although I've not seen it, that's getting in purely because it's Studio Ghibli. I've heard mixed things about it. Not terrible things. People haven't said, oh, it's an awful film, don't watch it, but I've not heard anyone say, oh, this is the next Spirited Away or the next Kiki's Delivery Service, My Neighbor Totoro, insert any film here. So when this episode comes out, of course you're listening to it in a couple of days, the Oscars will be going on, so I'll be interested to see how Across the Spider-Verse fares against all the other films. So yeah, I'm really excited to see whether it is held in high acclaim for, as we said, its animation, its characterization, all of the themes and things that it chooses to approach. It is really interesting. It's an interesting film, and yeah, good luck to everyone who worked on Across the Spider-Verse. Fingers crossed for you.
I think of the nominees, I would most like Spider-Verse to win, given that I think I enjoyed it the most. I left The Boy and the Heron kind of just be like, that was weird. And like I watch a lot of Ghibli, a lot of anime movies and TV shows, but I still left the cinema being like, that was a very strange movie I just watched. It was good, it was interesting, but it was just very odd. So I don't think I would hold it to the same esteem, especially as many Ghibli movies and as high as Spider-Verse. I went into Elemental, I knew that it didn't do very well at the box office. I knew that it kind of just felt like another one of those things Disney are doing in the moment where just like, what if this was alive? What if this was sentient? And so I kind of went in being like, all right, what's this going to be like? And I enjoyed it. The animation was very beautiful. There was a nice enough story, pretty predictable, but nice enough. And it was a fine movie. Again, I don't think it was as good as Spider-Verse. And then Nimona is an odd one where it was an interesting story. There's a lot of queer representation, both in the story, in the casting, in the characters, in the creators of the movie. That was very sort of interesting and represented. It was a medieval story told in a very modern setting. There were like knights and swords and that kind of idea, but with also like ray guns and that kind of thing. So that was very cool, very interesting. And the animation sometimes kind of took me out a little bit, but was also very beautiful at the same time. I don't really know what to compare it to. It was unique in many ways, and the story was very touching, but I don't think it was as good as Spider-Verse. So of all of those, my vote is Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse. You mentioned on your kind of impressions of Elemental. If you could pick, what would you pick of those movies?
In all seriousness, I think the potential winner might be The Boy and the Heron. If I'm going by a gut reaction, I don't think Elemental will win. I think maybe, because that's the thing, you're going against a Studio Ghibli film versus a Disney film, but both of which, ironically enough, aren't considered as a return to form for either studio. They're both kind of middling. Nimona, I feel as if there's a lot of people who would like that to be recognised and held up to the same standard as the other films. Across the Spiderverse, again, I don't know in comparison to the others. Like, I feel as if it does a lot of things well, but I'm honestly not too sure. All of them have their pros and cons going into the nominees, and I know that's the point of the Oscars, but it's really hard to tell because I don't think there's any that really stand out as a winner, if that makes sense. There doesn't seem to be one where I think that, you know, one of them is definitely going to win it, that they are going to blow out the competition, because as much as I loved this film, I don't think it maybe has as good of a lead as some people might think.
So just not going off of what you think will win, what do you want to win? Of Elemental and Spider-Verse, well, I mean, you only saw those two, so...
Well, yeah, it's a two-horse race, yeah.
Which were you most interested by? Which did you enjoy the most? Which do you think is most deserving?
My backside is going to get sore on the fence here, but I honestly don't know, because if it's purely in terms of the story, I would probably give the edge to Elemental. But if it was for animation, I thought Elemental did something quite interesting. And again, I know this is a whole other episode, but it did something quite interesting with the way they portrayed the character and the way that the characters interacted with the rest of the world. It's not the best Disney film out there, I'll admit that right off the bat.
I do like that Elemental is an immigrant story.
Yeah.
That is very interesting in how they kind of represent that in a more fantastical kind of setting.
Because that's the thing though, they could have easily made this film, and that's exactly what the trailers kind of gave off as, oh look, it's water people, but they go through a fence. Oh look, it's fire people. But they had this really interesting and quite emotional at times story about, as you said, this group of immigrant elementals who come over, they try to start a life for themselves, they bring over things like prejudices based on the water people and vice versa. I thought there was a lot to tell in that story, so if it was purely for story, Elemental, definitely. Animation though, again, it's a mix because both of them are beautiful, but I feel as if Spider-Verse did more creative things with the property, so I would probably give it to that. But again, this is me sitting up on my fence. But before we wrap up, what would you say? What would be the one you would want to win?
Spider-Verse, definitely. It's a bit of a cheap one, but the category is Best Animated Feature. And I think that as an animated feature, Spider-Verse trumps all of the others. I think it is beautiful. It tells its story through animation in such a unique way. And I'm also a bit biased to the fact that Disney and Pixar, which are bred to Disney, and Ghibli traditionally win the Best Animated Feature category. And so seeing a non-Disney one win would be nice. That's not my sole motivator. I do think that on top of that, Spider-Verse is a better movie, but I think that it would also be an extra sweet for someone that isn't this constantly winning studio to win. There's an element of me that fights against that because Elemental was a losing battle of people saying, like, oh, it's Disney have fallen off, this movie's not doing very well at the box office, all that kind of stuff, when in fact it was a very good movie, and to my understanding it actually did quite well internationally, just didn't do very well domestically in the United States. But I don't think that I have enough kind of sympathy for the conglomerate that is Disney for me to be swayed into sort of sympathizing for Elemental enough. I would rather it went to Spider-Verse, that I think is more deserving, and it's very rare that a superhero property would get Academy recognition, so I think that would be quite an interesting one to win. It's both a good reward for the animators' hard work and also potentially lights the fire under them again from the studio for them to get back animating again and get us another Oscar. So there's certainly a mixed element of that, but I do think that Spider-Verse is the best animated feature this year.
Well, we're going to find out this Sunday. In all seriousness, on that note, thank you, Andrew, so much for coming on and discussing Across the Spider-Verse.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. I feel like this episode is my canon event. It was due to come. It's a shame that we didn't manage to squeeze anything about the Spider-Verse movies into our Spider-Man month discussion last year, so it's nice that we could finally kind of cover that.
You know, funny enough, that was one of the questions I got behind whether or not we would cover the Spider-Man 2 game. The other question was, are you going to cover Into the Spider-Verse? Which I feel as if one day we could definitely go back and give it the full review that it deserves. But yeah, definitely one day. So before we wrap up and let these lovely listeners go away and watch the Oscars, where can they find some of your other work, Andrew?
Well, those who are keen Chatsunami listeners will know that I've been on many episodes over the last couple of years, so they can listen to some of the great catalogue of Chatsunami content. And in addition to that, you can also find both myself and Satsunami on the D&D podcast Stop, Drop, and Roll Initiative, where myself, Satsunami, wrestler Martin McAllister, and Twitch streamer Robotic Battle Toaster are in an ongoing campaign that you can hear right now where all good podcasts are hosted. You just look up Stop, Drop, and Roll Initiative and you will find it. You can also follow that podcast on Twitter or X at SDRI Pod, and you can find us as part of the Pod Pack Collective.
Yeah, it's been fantastic working with you guys on the Stop, Drop, and Roll Initiative podcast. It's definitely been a lot of fun to play D&D again and get back into that, but it's also been nice not being the one to organise it, being able to take a step back and let yourself, Martin McAllister, run the show and things. So that is an absolutely fantastic podcast. Definitely go check it out. And yeah, as you were saying, if you want to check out our Spider-Man month as well as any of the other catalogue of wonderful episodes we've done together, you can check us out at our website, chatsunami.com. I also want to thank our amazing Pandalorian patrons, Robotic Battle Toaster and Sonia. Thank you so much for supporting the show. And one more thing before we wrap up, as you said, we are indeed part of the Podpack Collective, which is a wonderful group of podcasters who are a wonderful group of indie podcasters who have come together to spread positivity and support within the indie podcasting sphere. So if you want to find out more information, then check us out on X/Twitter on our handle Podpack Collect. But until then, thank you all so much for listening to this episode, and as always, stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated.